Good afternoon, and thanks to one and all for joining us. This is the first in a series of the JL Farmakis webinar series, a regional series of webinars, and we're so glad to have you with us here today. As mentioned, I'm Don Wick from the Red River Farm Network, and we've got a tremendous farmer panel today. We're going to get a farm perspective on this year past, 2020, putting that in the rearview mirror, and also looking forward to where we're going in 2021 and some of those cropping decisions. First of all, we have Kyle Brazie. He's a fifth generation farmer from Edwardsville, Illinois. Kyle has 4,000 acres in corn and soybeans, and he has a dairy operation as well. Kendall Culp is part of a multi-generational farm, working side by side with his father and his son. They raise corn, soybeans, cattle, and hogs at Rensselaer, Indiana. Kendall's also a county commissioner and vice president of Indiana Farm Bureau. I'm based at Grand Forks, North Dakota, and you just go down the road down I-29 to Hillsboro, North Dakota, and you'll find Sarah Lovis, our next panelist. Sarah is a fourth generation farmer raising corn, soybeans, wheat, and barley. Sarah also has a crop consulting business. And Kyle, Kendall, Sarah, we are so appreciative of having you with us here today. This webinar is going to focus in on grower issues in the Midwest. Many of the topics that we are covering today are topics that are also being addressed in the new Farmer Speaks survey commissioned by JL Farmakis. This is an annual trend assessment. It's been conducted for the past 7 years and really gives us a look at farmer intentions as we go into the upcoming crop year. This survey was done at the end of 2020 and the early days of 2021. Just over 120 farmers were surveyed, most of those being large row crop farmers in the Midwest. I would like to remind you, first and foremost, we do invite your questions. We'll try to answer just as many as we can at the backside of our webinar. Our first section, we're going to talk really about what's going on with farmer attitudes. I look at what USDA tells us. Wrapping up 2020, USDA said nationwide farm income, net farm income, will be topping $120 billion. That's the highest level for farm income in 7 years. And at the same time, farm expenses are down. So some very positive news. And that is being reflected in the farmer attitudes, I think, that we're seeing in agriculture today as well. Half of the farmers that were surveyed, as you can see in our slide, in the Farmer Speaks study, said they were somewhat optimistic or very optimistic about 2021. That's double what it was 1 year ago at this time. So let's begin with our panel. Sarah, let's start with you. Is that something you would agree with as we go into this new year?
Absolutely. At least in my neck of the woods or the prairie, the farmer attitudes are just so much better than where they have been for the last couple of years. In North Dakota and Northwest Minnesota, especially in the last 2 years, we weren't just plagued with low commodity prices. We were also plagued with some incredibly wet conditions that made some of our just field operations very difficult. We had a number of prevent plant acres in 2020. Certainly, when you looked at the price of corn on the board, that certainly didn't incentivize us to plant it all. But we also had just incredibly complicated planting conditions that were almost impossible due to wet seed beds. So where we sit today, I think there's a lot of people that are taking a look at the commodity markets, and there's obviously a lot of optimism there, but we've also had the opportunity to dry out a little bit up here. So I think we're looking forward to a good spring.
Well, the fall season that we had, Sarah, in the Red River Valley was tremendous. One of the best ones we've seen in many years. That has to be a positive for our growers as we go into 2021.
Absolutely. It was kind of interesting. So where I farm in North Dakota, we actually had a very wet 2020 until we got to harvest. And once we got to the harvest season, then we finally dried out. But we got our last 6-inch rain. We had a number of large rainfalls throughout from fall of 2018 through 2019, and then through August of 2020. And our last 6-inch rain fell like the second week of August. And then we dried out after that. So we still had a lot of lower yielding crops due to just simply due to water damage and disease from that water. So it was kind of interesting because it was the first fall in a couple of falls where the actual harvestability in the field was pretty easy. You could go and get your crop harvested pretty easily, but the yields really weren't that great. So I made a couple comments to a few people. I've never seen such happy farmers over such a poor yielding crop, and it was simply because the field operations were that easy.
A year ago at this time, we still had corn standing in the field in many parts of the Red River Valley. So that's entirely different situation.
Absolutely. As a matter of fact, the last corn that I saw in my travels doing weekly crop consulting, I actually did see a combine out combining, harvesting corn after July 4th. And then I think after that week, I didn't see any more combines for the 2019 crop anymore.
Goodness. Kyle, let's bring you into the conversation. What's your perspective as we go into 2021? How satisfied were you with last year?
Yeah, we're pretty happy with the way 2020 turned out, and farmers in the area and myself very optimistic. So it's unusual that we see a run up in grain prices without all of the inputs matching it just step for step. I think the grain market caught us off guard, and above average corn yields by a pretty good step, and just slightly above average soybean yields in our areas made it a pretty successful year.
I interviewed an ag lender last week, and he talked about this farm situation today with not only the government payments, but also this rally we've had in the marketplace, that he saw it as the time to build muscle, to reinvest back into the farming operation. Is that something, as you look at going into the new year, that's part of your thought process?
Yeah, building muscle is a great way to put it. So, if you've got some equipment that's kind of on the fence or getting ready to start needing some serious repair, that's what we were looking at, and just trying to step up some different pieces that we knew were on the block within the next 2 or 3 years. Now is probably the time to do that. We also expect a pretty good price increase on some of that iron as we move into the end of 2021.
You purchased new or used equipment?
Some of both. Most of what we purchased was new this year, but definitely have some of both. Biggest
was it a good harvest for you?
Yeah, we had a great year, good planting. Had a little bit of a wet spell there. I'm going to say late May through June, caused just a little bit of replant, and then we had timely rains through July, which was huge for our corn crop. Our rain shut off that first week of August, and then we stayed dry for 6 weeks. That took the top 20%, I'll say, out of our soybean crop. Still had good yields, but the potential was there for a record soybean crop. That did not happen. And then a very uneventful harvest, just nice, beautiful weather, dry, almost so dry that when we planted wheat on time, it acted like a late planting because not all of it came up right away. So we had a beautiful harvest.
Kendall, how about you in Indiana? How optimistic are you as we move into 2021 and start thinking about this crop?
Well, it's interesting what a run up in grain commodity prices will do for a farmer's attitude, for sure. I think we have a really strong, optimistic sense in the ag community and in the countryside right now. Those run up in grain prices have been really positive. That wasn't predicted, obviously, and if you followed the advice of others or those in marketing and consultants or universities, you probably sold a fair amount of your crop and weren't able to take advantage of the run up in prices. But all in all, it still is really good for the attitude and for your outlook for agriculture as far as grains. Now, livestock is a little bit of a different story. We haven't seen those run ups like we have. Certainly early last year at the beginning of COVID, we had a big oversupply of about all of those commodities in the livestock sector and the livestock products, and certainly put a lot of pressure on those prices.
Yeah, we get excited about the higher corn and soybean prices, but when you got to feed those critters, that also increases the feed bill.
It does. That makes a difference, and we need to see meat prices increase to kind of correlate with those grain prices for everyone to come out on this.
Kendall, we mentioned it, government payments this past year. We saw trade-related relief coming from the Trump administration, as well as COVID-related assistance. How big of a factor has that been this past year?
Well, it's been huge actually for the bottom line of farmers for 2020. It's estimated that 39% of net farm income is going to be coming from government payments. And while none of us like that, the reality is we needed that to survive. A lot of this was due to government policies, and we understand that. Certainly, we had a lot of oversupply before those tariffs took effect. But I think the ag community appreciates Washington understanding the plight that farmers were in, and the retaliation was going to be made against agricultural commodities, which we saw that. And so they made good on that and said, we will support you and see you through this. And they did. And I think that's going to be the big difference between seeing a lot of farm auctions this spring and farmers actually going to the field with that equipment and putting in another crop.
We're in a very much a global economy, so farmers, I think agriculture feels it first when we have some of those challenges.
Absolutely.
So what kind of crop year was it for you, Kendall?
Well, we had a good crop year. Actually, it was very varied in Indiana. We had some folks that had absolutely record-breaking soybean yields this year. In my part of the state, in the Northwest Indiana, we're located between Chicago and Indianapolis. It quit raining in early August, and so we didn't have those last rains to finish off the soybean crop and actually our corn crop. It could have used another rain as well. So we had good yields, but we didn't have record-breaking yields. But you just think if you are 10 to 20 bushel above the average, and then you can sell that crop for $10 or $11 a bushel, and as far as soybeans go, it's no wonder that we have a lot of optimistic farmers right now, because that certainly helps our bottom line and our ability to go out and invest those dollars back into our farming operation.
No doubt. I look at this Farmer Speaks survey, and it had questions that really go into we go over really the past 5 years, and we ask many of the same questions or the very same questions, so we can do some comparison from year to year. From year to year, the equipment in this category is where we've traditionally seen the most change year over year. This year, according to the survey, the farmers indicated they are making changes in equipment, fertilizer, and seed, but the rate of change has declined dramatically. Kyle, let's start with you on this particular one. What changes are you making to your operation this year, and why?
I guess we have a little bit of uncertainty in our market when I think about the different trade integration, especially around soybeans. Which of these markets do we want to be in? Why do we want to use those? Definitely happy with the different things that we've tried, but not necessarily sure what companies we can trust and what we're able to do with some of these new technologies. So we're sorting some of those pieces out a little bit, but for the most part, no dramatic changes. But E3 versus Extend Flex and Straight Liberty, and from a soybean standpoint, would be one of the top things we're discussing yet.
Trust is an interesting word. How do you gain trust, or how do you put trust into a company or a brand?
Yeah, so I've been a Pioneer rep for 20 years, and I have a lot of faith and put a lot of time into doing the research and trying to figure out what is true, but we might have been misled on a few things the last few years. So trust has to be earned. It's not something that you can just run an advertisement or commercial and say, this is the right thing, trust us, it's right. In today's world in agriculture, we need that proven to us. So we work really hard at trying to do that on-farm type research and making sure that it's been shared with universities and the third party kind of guaranteeing that what we've been told is right.
Well, so much of the trade integration is how our foreign customers accept those products, and really the regulatory environment that we're in as well.
Yeah, so at the end of the day, we still have to remember that everything we're growing is the commodities to be sold to somebody. If you don't have an end use for that, or someone's telling you they don't want a certain trade or product, we have to be cognizant of that as producers. And even if that's say the best choice that a seed person or a company wants to push onto you, not necessarily the way you need to go.
So we're sitting here end of January. Kyle, tell me, when do you make those seed decisions, particularly what traits you're looking at in the upcoming growing season?
Yeah, so we're kind of trying to sort through Extend Flex, Liberty, and E3s, and I think the majority of our comfort level is around the E3s. When I think about specifically the county that we live in, we've got some endangered plant species, so the Extend piece is a little bit scary. We tried hard to work our way through that and to be able to use that, but some of the buffers and the requirements with it were pretty tough. So we end up just using Liberty on the Extend Flex beans, where the E3 has given us the opportunity to be able to spray enlist on those soybeans that control some of these really tough weed species that we have that continue to be a problem in a lot of our fields. So I'm going to say 99% of those decisions are made. I think ours are here for sure. So we're looking at Liberty and E3 being the primary of what we're using on our farm.
So as you make that trait decision, that also corresponds with what crop protection products you're utilizing as well.
That's right. So that's a shift, as we bring in some of these new products, we're going to be purchasing some things, maybe trying to learn a little bit more about mixability, what we need to do, what other off-target problems we could have. So we want to make sure we know everything about it as we move forward. Whereas in the past, maybe we took some people's word for it that didn't work out as well as we hoped.
So where do you go for that information? Is it from the company reps? Is it from the retailers? Is it from Extension? Where do you go?
I still like Extension and the Central Illinois Crop Management Conference is coming up. And those are people that we feel like we can trust and listen to when we have people at universities. So that's a big help for us. But independent research, in today's world, we can search out a lot of different pieces of information and still like to listen to our farm broadcasters and stuff and our farm radio shows, because those are the kind of been a consistent source of information for us.
I like to hear that. Kendall, let's bring you into the conversation. What changes, what kind of things are you looking to do differently perhaps in 2021?
Well, again, I think with the optimism we have with the potential return of profitability in our row crops, I'm certainly willing to invest more dollars in per acre in those crops and trying some new technologies, maybe some new fungicides, for example. Last year, since in our case, when our rain shut off, and so our yield potential just didn't look like it was going to be there. And you have to remember, we were in a $3 a bushel corn environment at that point in time. It didn't make a lot of sense to be spending $25 or $30 an acre, depending on how you apply the fungicide for a corn acre, to have the opportunity to possibly have a return from that. So that looks different this year. I'm certainly going to be trying some fungicides on some other acres. We're going to split application of some nitrogen. That were before we pretty much pre-plant everything and use a row starter for some additional N. We'll probably do some side dressing this year besides the pre-plant and split that application. And we're going to do some trials like that, some foliar sprays. There's a lot of opportunities and options that we have today based on traits and based on soil types, based on disease pressures. And again, I feel like that we can do that now that we have a little flexibility on the price side of the income side of the equation.
That market helps you try to reinvest or in that crop and maybe invest in yield more than you probably would with $3 corn, right?
Well, sure. I mean, obviously a farmer is always going to try to maximize their yield potential, because the thought is if you bring in, more yield, you have a more profit potential. But certainly if everything works to the way we think it can, the weather works with us, these are all opportunities, I think, to help mitigate the risk we have. As long as you can match up, if you have acres of corn on corn, which we do every year, we try to match up the right hybrid to those acres that we know maybe would be less prone to leaf diseases and other types of diseases that could happen from the crop. But this gives us an opportunity, I think, with that extra $1 to $1.50 a bushel potential, that we can really try a few more other technologies and apply those to help for a greater return in the end.
So When you make, are you making different trait decisions this year than last year, or how does that factor into your process?
Yes, we've looked into that. We're actually on our soybeans are going to stay with the Liberty platform again. Our seed company, I think we have more options that year for varieties of choices. I think we need one more year probably to go out and expand a little bit to try some E3 beans. What I found out is for ease of mind and ease of application is I'm going to go with one platform on all my acres. I don't have to second guess myself as, you know, did we run out of soybeans here and we switched at this point in the field and then you've got two different chemistries. It's just easier, I think, for us from a management standpoint to stay with that one platform.
So Sarah, let's bring you into the conversation here. As you start making cropping decisions for your farm for the new year, what's top of mind for you?
So the way I do crop planning for our farming operation is it really starts at harvest. Last fall, when I was soil sampling, I go out and do all the soil sampling because obviously that's part of my consulting business. And eventually I develop an entire fertilizer program based on those soil testing data. Somewhere in there, based in the markets, I'm going to set up a cropping rotation based in the markets, as well as the crop rotation for agronomic, trying to manage the crop rotation from an agronomic perspective as well. I'll set that up, and then I'll start working on seed. Most of the time I have a framework for my seed decisions, someplace end of November, beginning of December. It kind of gets shored up. Now, I don't have all of my seed decisions made. They'll be finalized when the seed is actually in the ground, which I know is frustrating for seed dealers. I apologize, but we do the best that we can to make those plans. I'll also be coming up with an entire herbicide program by the field based on the weed spectrum that I know that's in those fields. That's actually been something I'm starting to play with doing with my crop consulting clients as well, where on an Excel spreadsheet based on the field and the weed spectrum that we know and what resistant weeds we may be dealing with by crop, we'll set up an entire spreadsheet. Then you can take those information to your chemical dealers and have a good conversation about what products you might be needing and also how that's working into the chemical programs that retailers are offering. Don, if I can, may I go back to that idea of trust that you were talking about earlier?
Definitely.
So I think one of the things I really want to bring up with trust is access to good technical information. I started in the agronomy industry actually back in 2004, and I worked for ag retailers in the area. I feel like the business has changed so that there's a lot more emphasis on getting volume of product sold, which makes sense. I understand that's where the profit comes in, is you have to sell the volume of product. But within that, the way that I feel the sales is being represented in the countryside has kind of changed a little bit. I feel like my access to information sometimes from the technical standpoint is a little bit more complicated to get a hold of now than it used to be. There's a lot more emphasis placed on sales programs. I don't want to diminish the need for the information for good sales information either. A recommendation is only as good as how it economically fits into the farm as well as agronomically. But having access to good technical information for the products that we're using is critically important. And so one way that I look at having access to really getting, or one way that I think we can really increase trust with companies is by having some sort of an outlet for getting that technical advice. Now, some farmers look at somebody like a crop consultant as someone who needs to be the person going and getting that information. But I have worked with farmers who are certified crop advisors themselves, and they want to be the person having access to getting that technical information. So I don't always know what that looks like. And I also think it's important to realize that in certain states, or at least in North Dakota, access to having research conducted through a third party is really important. And in North Dakota, the Extension Service and our egg experiment station are critical for producing that information. Specifically, hard red spring wheat, that's a great example. We have great trials that produce extremely important information, not only about yield and test weight, but also the quality of that wheat. And that's very critical for that market, because that is a specialty, high quality wheat for milling properties. And some private companies have actually started taking their wheats out of those trials. And I actually, as a farmer, have chosen not to purchase those seeds any longer, because I feel like having that information for that particular crop is actually that important.
Interesting. Obviously, Sarah, you're in the Red River Valley. We can grow a lot of crops in this footprint, much more than just corn and soybeans. You talked about wheat. There's a lot of other things here as well. Are you looking at any shift in your acreage for this year?
I haven't heard anything back on malting barley contracts yet. I'm hoping that we can get some of that, some of those acres. I'll shift my acres somewhat, but due to a couple of agronomic things, I usually try to stick to a pretty good rotation where we're rotating between soybeans and a grass crop, whether that's wheat, barley, or corn. So I do try to stick to that pretty close. Where I'm at in Trail County here, I don't think we have quite the robust variety of crops that sometimes is felt across North Dakota. North Dakota has dry beans, sunflowers, pulse crops. I mean, we have a large variety of crops that are raised here. And I do honestly think that's one of the reasons why our land-grant university is so important to us here.
Kendall, can I bring you into that conversation about trust? What are you looking for when you're looking for information about planting, cropping decisions?
Well, obviously, I want to make sure I get unbiased, and I want to make sure I have to get information that I know has been done with a research done across a variety of products, not just one particular. Now, personally, I'm usually pretty brand loyal, and so I will certainly trust the company that I do business with to provide information. I mean, I know it's going to be their information, but that's the product I'm using on my farm. If I'm wanting to look for a broader range, then I'll use university information, which, I'm not too far from just up the road from Purdue University. And so that's really a trusted source of information and of research data that's used, and it's used throughout, I think, the Midwest as well, and the Corn Belt. So that's where I come from. Everybody has their research that can show that their products are the best products. Again, I think you need to pick a brand and be kind of loyal to that, and has served us pretty well on our farm.
For any one of you, how important is that relationship with the company rep, the person that you're dealing with from the different seed or chemical brands?
Well, I'll go ahead and talk about that. That's the face of the company. That's the face of that brand, is that rep. I like to do business with reps that also farm and plant those crops on their farm, and so they've got skin in the game, or fertilizer, what that might be. It's really key to that, because if there's a problem, I'm not calling the company, I'm calling my rep, and then they do the background work to make sure that we get taken care of. And if I don't have trust in my rep, I'm going to be looking for a new one.
Kyle, Sarah, what do you think?
Absolutely. Both from a farming perspective and a crop consultant perspective, that relationship with the rep is absolutely critical. And there are a number of reps that I have worked with that we know each other extremely well after years of working together. And they are my technical experts for those questions. If I have a question about a specific herbicide and I've read the label, they don't always like it if you call the rep and you haven't read the label first. You call them up and visit with them about the situation that you're facing. I feel like it, at least up here in my neck of the woods, we still have some reps that are very seasoned and very knowledgeable, but there's some companies that tend to be changing the reps through very rapidly in the territory. So developing that relationship and getting reps to have experience here with our crops and get to be very knowledgeable about those products right here for how we're using them is getting to be a challenge. It also used to be that sometimes these reps would bring actually the technical experts for their companies to some meetings that we would have, and we could really ask some great technical questions and have some good conversations. And there was a company that actually had reps out here that were designed to only be calling on crop consultants in this region, this area. And that was a very handy thing. That was ended by that company, which is too bad. I'm still texting him and asking if his company will allow him to meet with us, even though that's not his job anymore. And there's a bunch of crop consultants in the area that we actually set up meetings, like 3 or 4 of us right here in my little neck of the woods. And we will sit down and have conversations with those reps from a technical perspective to make sure we're getting the information we need.
Interesting. Carl, what influence do you see from the face of the company, the company reps?
I think what Sarah and Kendall both said makes so much sense. It's really pretty simple, right? So I look for reps from the chemical and seed side both. So I represent both at some fashion, but somebody who knows about all aspects of agriculture, somebody that you can bounce other ideas off of. I love what Kendall said about having somebody with skin in the game. So they're working those practices on their own farms and stuff too. That's very important to me as well. When I think about the people higher up in the chain of Pioneer, they all seem to have farms, and the really successful ones are all involved in it on their own farms as well too. And at the end of the day, the most important thing to me, it comes back to honesty and that they care more about what's happening on their customer's farm than they do about making the sale. You know, if you don't misrepresent those products and you go out and do what's best for your customer every time, the sales take care of themselves.
No doubt. Well, it was nearly a year ago when all of our lives changed, when COVID became part of our daily vocabulary. And we know farmers, you need to do whatever you can to get that crop in the ground. We learned when COVID came that farmers are part of that essential element that's out there. But obviously that interaction between the grower and those reps has changed during this time period. The Farmakis research found that 50% of farmers said they missed the personal interactions they had while doing business before COVID. 27% said they did not attend any virtual events designed to replace in-person events. So kind of interesting on the research how folks adapted to COVID and how they got their information. Kendall, let's start with you. You're in Indiana. With the pandemic, how did it impact your business?
Well, in some ways, a great deal, and in other ways, not much at all. From my livestock side of our operation, we had a tremendous negative impact on our operation. The day that our plant, which was a Tyson plant here in Indiana, about an hour from me, they shut down, was the day we were to sell a load of hogs to them. So we were several weeks where, you know, we just kept feeding those hogs. We put them on a kind of a low gain ration. Finally, and we were fortunate, we finally got to move those hogs. I mean, they weighed 232 pounds, or 332 pounds, pardon me, when we moved those. And unfortunately, it became a thought process of not about how much am I going to get for those financially. It's just, I'm going to be able to finally empty my barn. So we were losing money at the market. I mean, we sold those hogs at just over 29 cents a pound. So it had a big negative impact. COVID did, because of the workers at that plant were testing positive, and they just had to finally shut it down for health reasons. From the grain side, the row crop side, I was concerned, would we be able to get parts? Would we be able to have service performed on the farm on our tractors or equipment? And as it turned out, there was very little disruption in that at all. Some curbside parts pickup was really about the only problem. If we needed a service call, it happened. So we were glad to see that. So if you're strictly a grain farmer, I'm not sure that you probably recognize too much of a disruption in the goods and services that you needed. We were able to get our inputs. We pretty much had everything laid in on the farm, our grain or our seed rather, and our fertilizer products, pest control, all that. We had that application that was not a problem at all. But certainly there was a lot of concern, and still certain parts, for example, are maybe still back ordered because of delivery, or certain manufacturers shifted and they're making another product now and they're not making what you might need. And that's still causing some backlogs and disruptions. But I think all in all, for especially a grain farmer, we saw very little disruption due to COVID.
I spent a lot of time at trade shows and those kind of things. Obviously, a lot of those events did not happen this past year. Is that a concern to you, or is that an issue, Kendall?
It is a concern. I attend the Commodity Classic every year. Of course, we just snuck that in last year, the 1st of March. Of course, it is canceled, or a virtual event this year. And that's unfortunate, because there's a lot of information and data that's collected and gained, knowledge gained at those, but it's also the interaction with fellow producers that you have there, and with some of the vendors that are there, and the folks that have displays, and you gain a lot of information from that one-on-one with other people. And that's the big part that's missing, that I think is the biggest concern of mine, is you can still get information, but we have to learn to get it now in a different way. We're not going to get it so much face to face. We're going to have to get it, whether it's internet based or obviously the traditional methods of print and radio. Those are still very viable options as well. But a lot of vendors, especially if you're rolling out something new, a new product, a new technology, a new trait, you do that at a trade show or a National Farm Machinery Show or somewhere like that. We didn't have that option in 2020, and maybe even in 2021, we won't. So we have to learn to adapt to new ways, to new methods of receiving that information.
Sarah, what about you? How has the pandemic impacted your operation?
Well, going back to last spring, I don't know if I really felt it that much, which sounds really crazy. I am a mother, but of a 3-year-old. And so he was still able to go to daycare, and those sorts of things. But really last spring, it was kind of a historic spring by farm work standards here, just because of the climate and environmental conditions we were facing. So it was all about getting the crop planted, or what do we do with this crop? Should we even plant? Can we plant? It was those sorts of things. But when we needed to get our inputs, we were always able to get our inputs. And we made it through the year just fine. So I feel like I didn't really even feel the pandemic until after harvest was completed and mating season began. And so really, for me, the number one change that I've seen is information delivery. I certainly miss some of the networking that I have had previously at some meetings. But at the same time, I appreciate the fact that I don't have to have as much travel time. So I'm hoping going forward that there's a nice way to blend that. I don't necessarily want to see Zoom meetings go away, but at the same time, I can't wait to see some of my colleagues again. So I don't know what that looks like going forward, but I hope there is a nice blend.
I agree with that. Kyle, what do you miss most from the time before the virus?
Yeah, we've had some changes. I don't want to act like it's anywhere near when I think about what our local businesses have gone through, restaurants, stores, and Ag's had some changes, but not like where I see some of those local businesses suffering. I definitely miss the personal connection the most. When you go to a commodity classic, I learn as much walking up and down aisles and talking to other farmers and people that you may have met from around the U.S. and having those conversations. That's changed the way that we've worked with our farmers too. And we're putting together crop plans and we're working on that. Sometimes we meet personally yet and do our best to stay socially distanced while we do that. In other cases, we'll do a Zoom. This has, been an eye-opening experience for me about the effectiveness of this communication tool. And, to sit here and see everybody and be involved and allowed to ask questions, it's starting to feel more personal and normal to me. So I don't think it will replace that connection totally, but I've come to getting used to it, I guess, after the last few months, especially.
What do your ag retailers do to maintain that relationship with you as a grower?
They're contacting us through these same types of tools, and we still do an enormous amount of work on the phone. Texting and on the phone is still a great way to stay in constant contact. So emails, phones, texting, all of that stays the same. Uh, as opposed to the only thing we're really missing is those large events, those large meetings, and maybe not even the large ones where we'd have a dozen people in a room. We quit doing that. It's just not happening right now.
I would remind folks that we'll get to your questions and answers a little bit later in the program, but we encourage you to go to the chat section and get those questions asked so we have them in the queue. COVID or not, ag companies, they all need to communicate with their customers or their future customers. Sarah, from your perspective, we look at the changes of the past year. What's the best way companies have had to reach you, to get in contact with you?
It's been through a phone call or a text message. But what's interesting about that, I feel like the way that I was working with egg retail before that was kind of moving into that direction anyway. On any given day, especially during the growing season, I'm probably out in a field and not at the shop, and very difficult to track down because I'm actually out crop consulting. And so when people wanted to call on me, they drop me text messages or phone calls. And it's been a really great way of doing things. The retailer that I primarily use, well, actually all the retailers that I use have gone to a delivery method anyway prior to COVID for pretty much all crop inputs. And so it's a text message saying what you need delivered to the farm, and it shows up. And when I would have products that need to be returned, I would go through and make a list and then email that in so that they had it. So it's interesting that it's moved that direction. I have done Zoom meetings with some of my clients, and before Christmas, right around November, Thanksgiving time, North Dakota's numbers were pretty high for COVID. And I had ambitions of seeing my family locally here. And so to manage that COVID, I actually did Zoom meetings with my retailers to make seed decisions. So that did actually happen.
How important is local information to you, Sarah?
Pardon?
How important is localized information?
Localized information is important. It's important, but one of the things that I always look for, especially when I'm looking at test plot data, is what sorts of environments, where were the environments that it was tested, how did it perform, and how was the field design of that plot set up, and how was it statistically analyzed? I don't know if that makes any sense, but I do want to see that from the northern end of the valley. Obviously, the products that I'm using are much different than Kendall and Kyle, so that is important.
So Kyle, let's bring you into this. What's your view? How do you get the information you're looking for to make decisions?
Yeah, we talk a lot and focus a lot on what's changed, and the things that haven't changed is telephone, email, text, the way we have been doing it, but also radio. Every piece of equipment we own has a radio in it, and I think there's kind of this misconception that younger farmers don't pay attention to that very much. I'm not sure that's true. And I'll bounce back to the conversation about trust. Don, you and I think about RFD in Illinois, Rita Frazier. She has earned the trust of caring as much about agriculture as any farmer I've ever met driving up and down a field, and would never misrepresent a product or try to steer us down the way. Just bring us good, unbiased information. So, and we're focusing a lot on what's changing. I thought I'd pick something that hasn't changed. So,
I like that. That relationship that you have with the farm broadcaster sounds like it's pretty important to you, Kyle.
Well, she's earned our trust, and yeah, we enjoy learning from her.
Kendall, as far as information for you, what do you want marketers to know about how you consume information?
Well, again, it's kind of a combination of ways, but Kyle brings up a good point. We spend a lot of time in a truck or a tractor, and so the easy communication method is to listen to the radio. And I kind of like one-stop shopping, so to speak. If I tune into my farm broadcaster and I can get the markets and I can get the weather and I can get the news, what's going on in Washington, around the world that are going to affect the markets and any up-to-date issues in Indiana specifically that they're being talked about. That's pretty easy to get that information and to take that in. We all have a phone with us, and so we can gather about any information from that as well. So obviously the use of technology is pretty important, but I mean, when it comes down to it, besides that phone, it's as simple as a phone call or a text message as well. My marketer, for my grain marketer, or my livestock buyer, same way. Most of that is done through a voice message or a text message. So we've learned, I think we're learning a lot through COVID and through just the how communication is evolving naturally, even without COVID. We're all looking at new options, and we have so much available to us really at our fingertips. But in the end, I kind of like what's easiest for me, what's most available to me. And if I can dial into some place, or if I can pick up the paper of an evening and I can get that information in print, I'm going to take time and view it and read it and take that in and comprehend it.
Interesting. We're going to jump into some of the questions that we've had here. We've had some great
Don,
questions coming in. Sarah,
can I add one thing to that?
please.
I forgot to add podcasts. I've gotten really into doing podcasts. One of the things that Red River Farm Network does around here is they actually have their broadcasts over podcasts. And so I can just plug in my AirPods no matter what I'm doing, and I can listen to that. And that's really important, especially when I'm crop scouting, because I'm out on my four-wheeler and I can still listen to it because I'm not by radio then.
I like that. Thank you. Let's get to some of these questions here. What do you guys say is the most important factors to consider when switching or trying a new seed brand?
Well, this is Kendall. I'm probably not the best person to ask that because, as I talked about brand loyalty, I don't switch around a lot. But if I have a particular need, whether that is a pest problem or just a need for increased yield, or maybe a corn that's or a soybean that's more drought tolerant or more that can handle wet situations and disease pressures, that sort of thing, I'll look at that, but I probably will stay within the brand that I have. So it's specific to needs that I have on my particular farm. And we kind of go back to relationships with folks you do business with, we talked about earlier. And that's one thing, is when you're loyal to someone and you stay with that salesperson, they know my fields, they know my situations, they know my soil types, and they can propose and suggest hybrids, for example, or fertilization programs that fit the specific needs that I have. And I think that's another reason why our family has always been pretty loyal to not only the salesperson, but that brand as well.
Kyle, you seem to be nodding your head when Kendall was talking there.
Yeah, I mean, you could sum it up with return on investment and trustworthy advice, right? So how we get that information may be different, but to work with the same person year in and year out gives you such an advantage to understand what those weed species are, what those problems may be, what other pathogens we need to make sure we're targeting against, and not wasting money, but coming up with a sound agronomic plan that brings back a return on that farmer's investment.
Another question here. When you're looking at new brands and looking at new products, are you more influenced by ads or by doing proactive research? Sarah,
For me, I'd say it has to do with people can bring forward new products and things like that, but versus the ad might make me aware that there's a new product out there, but it's really going to come down to a relationship that I've got or some sort of data that I've seen that makes me really curious about that product. It's all about the agronomic fit and how it's going to agronomically and economically fit on the farm.
Kendall or Kyle?
I need
I agree with
the
that.
ad to bring it up, I think, otherwise we don't understand what some of the new stuff is out there. So that coupled with the research after we realize what it is.
Kendall?
Yep, I agree. I'm more about the research, but Kyle brings up a good point. We have to know what the research is and that's available to us. Some of these companies I get enthused because they'll send out a promotional item, and I'm like, they spent $8 to mail that to me, for a piece of paper that maybe pulls apart and has some catchy little slogan in it or something. But again, obviously they wouldn't do that if it wasn't effective. So I agree with both Sarah and Kyle on that. The research is what's important, but sometimes you do have to get our attention to let us know that that's even available.
Another question here. How many of you use no-till farming, if any, in your corn and soybean acres?
So we use no-till in our soybeans, minimum till in our corn.
Kyle?
I would say that you'd probably have to classify us as conventional tillage. We try to direct seed soybeans as much as possible in the spring of the year. We've got what's called Fargo clay soil here. It's a very thick clay, lots of clay content. So it's tough to go without that. As you go west in North Dakota, though, you primarily get to 100% no-till very quickly.
Kyle?
We're almost all no-till soybeans, just a few circumstances where we needed to do some tillage, maybe down on some bottoms where we wouldn't be. And a decent percentage of the corn is no-till, and the majority of it's minimum till. So if we're using anhydrous ammonia, we would have that toolbar come through that field. Field cultivate just to level that back out and plant is very, very normal for us.
Another question in queue here. What are your thoughts on biotech versus non-biotech seeds?
So is there a market there and an incentive for me not to use biotech? Is there a reason for me to use biotech, and is it worth the premium that is built into using that technology? That's really what it comes down to. And as always, I think it's important to remember, no matter what production system you're in, it's important to be responsible environmentally, and there's ways to do that on both sides of that.
Kendall?
I'm a big supporter of biotech traits. We use those certainly on our farm. As I think one thing agriculture needs to do is we need to tell our sustainability story. I think that's going to be brought to a forefront here with the new administration in Washington. We have a great story to tell, and biotech helps us be a lot more sustainable on our farms. It's certainly a misconception out there a lot with the public. They actually think biotech means it's used more chemicals, more herbicides, or for some reason it's not safe. I know I traveled to China several years ago with our Indiana Soybean Association, and the folks we talked to over there, they thought that we raised GMO and non-GMO soybeans, and that we shipped them the GMO soybeans and we kept the non-GMO for ourselves, and that's what we consume. So there's just a lot of misconception about that, but agriculture really has embraced GMO. We just need to make sure that we reach out and make sure that our consumers know the safety of that as well.
Kyle, would you say it's a lot of misconceptions when we talk about GMO products?
Yeah, it's going to be hard to come up with a better answer than Sarah and Kendall just said. So they really touched on everything. We can do a better job with GMOs targeting specific species and pathogens. We're probably actually using less pesticides when we plant those products. So we need to make sure we're educating consumers. But if there's a consumer market, and I think Sarah touched on this, that's willing to pay for that and wants that, we'll absolutely continue to consider that. We want to make sure we're reaching out to everybody, and and we'll do the best we can. But it takes a sizable premium to make that happen in today's world. You know, we're selling bushels. It takes a pretty good premium to make that worth our time to step away from GM crops.
And if I could add one more thing to this conversation, I think it's important to remember that there's always trade-offs with everything. And I think you can make an argument that maybe organic production does use fewer chemicals, but the trade-off might be that you're going to be doing a lot more tillage to manage pests, and that can be damaging to your soils as well. So there's give and take on all sides of it. It's not a simple cut and dry answer.
For the three of you, would you consider yourself an early adopter when it comes to some of the new products out there, the new technologies, or do you want to see it, maybe your neighbors go through a year with it first or something so you can get a chance to evaluate?
Well, I'll go first. I would not consider myself an early adopter as far as maybe the first year. Now I remember when Roundup came out, and I mean, I was anxious to get those, plant those GMO beans, because we had wheat pressure certainly that we could not control at that time. But no, I'm usually greet those with open arms and are certainly willing to try those. I may not try them in year one, but I certainly would be a year two subscriber to those.
Kyle?
I probably would be an early adopter. I would like to try the new stuff as fast as we can and take advantage of it as quickly as we can. But I do want to make sure that we have global markets in mind, that everything is approved and we're okay to move forward with it before we would stub our toe on those types of situations.
What do you think, Sarah?
So I'm the person that usually I like to talk to somebody who's technically sound with that product. If it's a pesticide or fertilizer or something, or even a seed, I want to ask the question, how does it work? And I do this often actually with reps. How does it work? And I'm looking for a technical answer. If it doesn't make sense, I'm probably no longer interested. And then I want to see your plot data. And again, how is the field design of that test plot, and how is it statistically analyzed? So if that's the case, then I'll experiment with it for the first year. Otherwise, somebody else can do the experimenting.
What about, we talked about the investment in things that'll maybe add to yield this year. I think you talked about it, Kendall, with fungicides and such. What about biologicals? We see a lot of growth in that microbial area. Are any of you guys interested in those things?
Well,
I'll start with you. I'm sorry.
Nope, go ahead. I was going to say, I actually had a conversation with a biological company that came out last week, and everything that I just said in my previous answer was our conversation. And I guess for right now, I don't really plan on experimenting with it. Somebody else will get that tried and true, and then when that's there, I'll come on board.
Kyle, how do you feel?
Yeah, eager to try new things, but still looking for some proof. The biological market is really hard to find that sound science behind it. It just seems like we see wild swings of why the claims say they do what they do. Now, there are some biostimulants that I think do some pretty decent work for us that have been proven well in seed treatments. Maybe some growth stimulation stuff, but for the most part, very slow to adapt to biologicals.
Kendall?
Yeah, and I would agree with Sarah's comment in particular that I'm probably going to let, in that area, I'm going to let others try that. There certainly needs to be a lot of research and data done, and I want to see those trials before I would reach out and try that on my farm.
One more question. What do you see as the biggest challenges in agriculture as we look out for the next few years, and what can the seed and the chemical companies do to help you along that path? Kendall, let's start with you.
Well, I think as you look forward, I mean, first what came to mind is it has to be financially stable, right? We have to have price stability, but to have that, we've got to have a market. We've got to have a demand, and that's where I think we need to go with this. We have to have demand. We need to have market. We need to have new uses for our products, so we can have the price that we need. I mean, it's kind of the, do we get the cart before the horse here, because we're going to have both. That's where I think a lot of our commodity groups, associations can help us with this, with developing new uses and new products, new demand to use the bushels that we do produce. We have to remember in this country, we're great overproducers of agricultural commodities. 95% of the world's population lives outside of the borders of the United States. And so when we're growing this food and we're growing fuel, we're doing it for the world, not just for us here locally. So whether it's, and I think we all have a great role in that. I mean, I think the suppliers have a great role in marketing and developing those products, in supporting the farmers as they're growing those. But then again, government has a role in this too. And I usually like to keep government at kind of at arm's length. They have to help sell the products. And that was one thing Secretary Perdue had promised us 4 years ago. He said, you grow the product and we'll sell it. We'll find a market for it for you. And that's one thing that really needs to continue to happen, is we have to look abroad for us to be successful domestically.
Kyle, what do you see as the big challenges as we move forward here?
Yeah, we got to remember to stay focused on production. I know that that's still always going to be one of our key, but continuing to build new markets, government involvement in those markets. And I worry a little bit about precautionary type regulation as we bring in some of these new products and the ways we'll be allowed to use those. That's pretty high up on my radar right now too, is how all this all comes together with the new administration and how we'll be able to use the new products that are on the market.
Sarah, your thoughts?
One of the things, especially since I'm thinking there's a lot of different companies on this call, one of the things that we face in North Dakota with our crop diversity is sometimes we don't have, for example, a lot of chemicals to use in some of our specialty crops. And sometimes all it takes is taking a look at some of the older chemistries that are on the market that have been used in other crops, and exploring the opportunity of doing some research in those crops, which, by the way, our local egg experiment station is very interested in helping out with that. And then looking at getting them labeled. And I realize what I just said is, would you please go to the EPA and label more pesticides, which actually isn't the easiest thing to do. Totally understand that. But it is one thing that you can look at and think about, especially for some of these specialty crops. I know it's hard because there's not a lot of acres, but it's really important.
Well, I think we've had a real valuable discussion here today. I've enjoyed the conversation. A big thank you to Kyle Brazie, Kendall Culp, and Sarah Levis for your input. Thanks to each one of you for being a part of our session today. A reminder, if we could, want to make sure you reach out to your JL Farmakis representative for a full copy of this 2021 Farmer Speaks study that has been completed. And again, we want to thank you all for being a part of this first JL Farmakis regional webinar. This session has been on the Midwest, but we've got one that's going to be coming up this spring that'll focus in on some of the specialty crop areas. So again, keep on the outlook for that. As mentioned, for a full copy of the Farmer Speaks study that we reviewed, we'll be happy to share that information with you as well. And again, a big thank you for joining us today. It's been wonderful. On behalf of JL Farmakis, I'm Don Wick. Thanks for being with us today. Have a great day.